Hello, everyone. I'm Denise Birkhofer, collection curator at the Image Center, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for Canada Now Artists in Conversation. This conversation series is organized in conjunction with the Canada Now Photography Acquisition Initiative and its related exhibition, which is on view at the Image Center from September 14 through December 3rd, 2022. The exhibition features the photographic work of 10 emerging or mid-career Canadian artists from across the country, all acquired through the support of funds provided by photographer Edward Bertinsky and Nicholas Metivier Gallery. And I'm so excited to be joined today by two of these artists, Rebecca Bair and Séamus Gallagher, joining us from two very diverse areas of the country all the way. Séamus is in Halifax and Becky is in Vancouver. So thank you both for joining us. It's great that we can come together in this platform to talk about your work. So to begin, I thought I would invite each of you to briefly introduce yourselves, as well as the body of work that is featured in Canada Now. So Becky, if you don't mind, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, totally. So my name is Rebecca Bair. I go by Becky in all of my spaces. I am from the traditional and ancestral territories of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, otherwise known as Ottawa, and I currently live in the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, otherwise known as Vancouver. So, to introduce myself briefly, I would say, my practice is very much about representation, and everything that I do in all of my spaces is about representation. I am an educator and a cultural organizer here in these lands. And my work functions to think through, my understanding of Black experience as a young Black woman and the possibilities of representation that extend past figuration. So thinking about abstraction and non-figuration as tools for representation that are rooted in agency and rooted in a sense of liberation, really. And I use symbols like my hair constantly. I use symbols and what I call collaborators like the sun constantly in my work. And I hope that these are symbols that draw people in, particularly Black people, so that they can find themselves in my work, not to prescribe identity, but rather to create a site where we can meet and we can feel closeness with one another. I have a really interdisciplinary practice. I'm formally trained as a photographer, but it's really exciting to be making works that are very much about photography, but also in so many ways about performance and about this kind of state or this possibility of immersion, of getting people into the work. And that definitely comes through in Reach and Coil, and Reach and Coil Découpé specifically for this exhibition for Canada Now, which I think ended up being about 10 feet long, the original about 14 feet. But this version I'm so excited about because it's a morphing of this work. It's a new life for this work that still takes in so many aspects of the original, where you have to walk the span of this blue sky, or I've heard many kind of versions of this experience where people see it as water, with hair on either end, both holding you in, but also completely autonomous of our presence there. They're reaching for one another and reaching for the sun from either side of the print. Maybe I'll stop there. I'm really excited to talk more kind of collectively about our works and how they kind of work together.
Thank you, Becky. That's a great introduction. So yeah, let's hear from Séamus.
Yeah, hello, my name is Séamus Gallagher. I am very flattered to be here right now. So excited to be talking with the both of you. And I am a lens-based media artist currently based in Kjipuktuk, also known as Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I predominantly work in photography, video, and virtual reality. Over the past few years, I've sort of developed this process of 3D modeling these sort of drag inspired figures and 3D modeling these sort of costumes and headpieces and chest plates, and finding a way using a program called Pepakura to convert these 3D models into paper templates so that I can then physically reconstruct and wear and perform within, and bring in this sort of digital aesthetic, almost like a nostalgic sort of low poly, like N64 early 2000s aesthetic, into my sort of interests today, which are sort of gender performance and drag, and using this sort of process to talk on both themes. So the series that was acquired through this acquisition is called A Slippery Place, and it was a project that I worked on as my undergraduate thesis show at NASCAD University. It was where it began in 2019, and that's where I first started developing this process of 3D modeling using programs like Blender and VR sculpting with Medium, and bringing it into a physical space. And while I was working on this project initially, I came across an essay by Legacy Russell entitled Glitch Feminism. And in that, she talks about the concept of the glitch being a sort of a possibility for new aesthetics to emerge, and like an opening for new narratives to be unveiled. And she talks about the etymology of the word glitch, referring to glitchin, which means either to slip or to slide, or a slippery place or area. And I was really just interested in this sort of queering of something that has such a huge negative connotation, like a glitch, which is fundamentally an error, but viewing an error as a possibility for something else to be created out of it. And so the work kind of has to do with that sort of slipping and sliding of performances, and in thinking of the glitch as like a more utopic opening for new horizons. So the series are constructed using a video game engine called Unity, where I created these virtual environments and then would extract images out of them to create backgrounds where I would perform in front of, using these sort of paper masks and models, and trying to bring a sort of connection between this video game and drag aesthetic that I continue to work with today. And this acquisition also included a commissioning of A Slippery Place 5, which I was really honored to do.
Thank you, Séamus and Becky, for your introductions to your works. There's so much to talk about. Thank you, Séamus, for also mentioning the commission aspect, because that was one unique thing that the two of you share within this acquisition, is that you both kind of adapted existing works or series and created a new commission for this Canada Now initiative, which has been really great. So you both share that. The other thing that you share, among other things, in terms of these series, is this focus on the self as an image and kind of a starting point for the many themes that you explore in your works. So I wanted to ask if you could each speak to that concept of how you utilize this image of the self and how that resonates in your own work, but also how you experience that concept or observe it in the other person's work. So maybe Séamus, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, so I really admire, I feel like in comparing both of our works, I find mine to be a bit more selfish in the ways that I handle sort of self-representation. Like I've watched sort of interviews where you talk about your work and discuss sort of your hair being used as a sort of like anchoring point for sort of a Black plurality, to not really necessarily focus it on you, but as like a meeting ground for people of like wider sort of Black cultural spectrum. And thinking of that sort of plurality, I connected that with my sort of mask making, which again, more selfishly, is a sort of way for me to sort of envision like a plurality of one's own sort of fluid, slipping, sliding identity and sort of performance of the self. Like one of my heroes is Claude Cahun, a self-portrait artist from who's predominantly worked in like the 1920s. And they have a quote that said, "Underneath this mask, another mask. I will never be rid of removing these faces." And so just that idea of like performing and sort of like a masquerade as a way of uncovering like other selves within oneself. And yeah, just that idea of like plurality and not focusing necessarily on one's own face, but sort of abstracting the sort of concept of the self as a way of unveiling new possibilities. Yeah. I hope that's enough to say.
I think you said that really beautifully. And I mean, a lot of what I was thinking about in terms of the kind of the similarities in the performative aspects, I guess, performance of self kind of component of our work, I think you touched on so beautifully. I was thinking so much about, and the way that I kind of named it is I said that we were extending ourselves. Like you were saying with the masks, it's not about necessarily this performance of this really rigid self. It's the like performance and documenting of ourselves in the most kind of, as you said, plural and multifaceted and exciting way. I say all the time that my work isn't quite archival. I use materials like shea butter in my work, and I tend to make works that, again, collaborate with the sun and ask for the shifting that happens that is determined by material and determined by sun, or determined by all kinds of things that are beyond me. And in that kind of same breath, I think that our work, our photographic work does that in and of itself. It extends this kind of rigid idea of photography, or this rigid idea of self. We are playing and we're trying and we're creating space for so much more than what we might be kind of seen as on a regular basis, where we're really embracing the kind of the sense of possibility and the sense of, as you said, plurality. I think honestly, I'm talking in circles because I think you said it so well. Yeah, but definitely plurality in this performance is absolutely where I see our works kind of coming together and speaking with one another. And that feels so exciting to me.
I will say as well, something that's sort of a connection I made while you were talking is the sort of, it's almost like documentation of a performance, like thinking about, apologies, I forget the name of the work, but I think you do a performance with shea butter on like a scroll.
Yeah.
And like the performance itself, maybe not necessarily being the artwork, but just the sort of like remnants of it, or the sort of documentation of said performance. Like I do a lot of work to create my masks, create my costumes, create all this stuff, the sets, and then as soon as the flash goes, like tear it all down. Like,
right.
It just sort of like, maybe that's because of both of our backgrounds in photography, but having the sort of like document of the performance itself rather than have the performance be the work.
Yeah, I think I'm way too shy to do the actual performance.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I couldn't do it live. But yeah, that's such a lovely point. And I mean, I think of the sculptural aspects in your work too, which again, extend, you know, it's an extension of stage, it's an extension of self. I think in the rendering of the spaces, of these digital spaces, I think that also holds so much of yourself, and then it's digital and it's very much in you, it's in the present. It does this beautiful dance. And as you said, it's really documenting the performance and not the performance itself. And again, creating possibility for something else to happen kind of in that space in between. Yeah, it feels super exciting to me.
Thank you.
Super inspired by your work.
Oh, you too.
Oh.
No, you.
Oh, no, you.
I'm loving this dialogue. I would love to also hear what other questions you might have for the other about their work, or other observations about parallels, differences in your approaches and in your subjects.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do kind of want to talk about the sculptural aspect again, because I mean, in my making, so much of my work is kind of specifically installed, I would say, to ask a viewer to immerse themselves in my work. Like I recognize that it's, again, a documentation of this performance of self. But again, in that in between where that possibility kind of really sits, I ask of viewers to kind of enter, right? And to decide, to negotiate whether or not they are welcome or not, if they can be here or not, if they want to be here or not. And I think that your work does that as well. I think that your work extends and confronts the viewer beyond the frame. And then also, I'm just thinking even of these spectacular portraits, and there's lots of space actually around you, right? You are really in an environment and you have created this incredible space. And I think it's both, you know, yours, and you occupy it in such a powerful way, but it also, in some ways, I can imagine there being space for community there and being space for others there. And that feels like a really lovely invitation for those who are prepared to kind of answer that invitation if it is there. And for those who your work really resonates with, you know, I can imagine people coming into the gallery and feeling absolutely at home, which is something that I try to create in my work as well. Yeah, maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, oh, that was beautifully put. Yeah, I guess, I mean, growing up in like Moncton, New Brunswick, so much of the community I would find as like a deranged little queer kid was online. And so I think I've always just been drawn to like more digital aesthetics as a result of that. And so creating these images, I did want to harken back to like the video games I would play as a kid, but also finding ways of bringing it back today in these like queer costumes and these sort of extravagant modes of like centering myself within them. But one important thing in sort of exhibiting it in a more like solo exhibition capacity due to logistics is having elements of the work spill out into the gallery as a way of inviting people within the space and to showing people how the works were made. Like I love having the sculptures there so you can see the strands of hot glue and like really sort of like bringing it down to a physical level where the mistakes are present, but also adds like a sort of like scrappy element to it that I really appreciate. I like embracing the sort of flaws that my practice invite.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you say that because I think of that a lot in my practice too, in my kind of extended practice beyond reach and coil. Again, as photographer, okay, maybe I'll restart. I think about painting a lot. And in painting, we talk so much about documenting brushstroke and trace and all these things that kind of allude to human presence. And I think in photography, obviously there are analog processes that really involve our hands and involve our bodies in different ways. But I do think so often about what it means to extend past the frame or to hold within the frame those traces of our making, of our mistakes, of our humanity, you know? And in the ways that I install my work and the ways that I display my work, as you were saying, I want people to see, you know, the threads coming off the side of fabric. I want people to see my fingerprint in the shea butter that I smear over my own portrait. You know, I want people to feel, I don't want to hide the reality of making and the real, my presence. And again, it has something to do, and maybe in my mind with this kind of, the idea of perfection and this really kind of fixed form of representation. I want to hold in my work and in portraiture and in my practice space for mistake, space for development, space for change. Even in the representation of Blackness, I think about how drastically my practice changes and how I think about my own experience of Blackness. It's not one thing forever. It couldn't be. I'm changing. My understanding of Blackness changes, rooted in the past, but also kind of as it progresses and evolves through community and through pushing forward. So I love the idea of walking into a space and feeling humanity, and feeling, where you might have been in your making, and then where your work might go. I would be excited then to see the next works and find or search for those little pieces of your actual trace and presence.
That was really beautifully put. Yeah, another connection between our work, just the sort of embrace of the imperfections.
Absolutely.
I think that's like where this sort of effective qualities come in, is through those like traces of the humans, like an actual like physical sort of embodiment in it. And especially with working with like, I don't know if cold's the right word to use, but like cold technologies like video game engines, where there's sort of like an emphasis on a sort of like sheen, pristine. I like to have this sort of more human scrappiness involved in it.
I love that.
May I ask you a question?
Oh, please.
Sorry if that's like a bad segue. So I sort of mentioned flippantly before, I feel selfish in relation to your work when you sort of describe your practice, but I know outside of your art practice, you are an educator and a teacher. And I was wondering if you want to talk about sort of whether or not that experience influences how you view or create your own work, or vice versa.
I think inevitably, absolutely. The privilege of teaching is that, in my mind, you are, especially at like a university level, because that is where I am an educator. It's not about necessarily imparting your knowledge always. It's creating space, again, space for possibility, space for chance, space for learning, a space for reciprocity. And my classrooms are always about exchange, about learning from one another, sharing with one another. And I tell my students every time at the beginning that I'm learning with them. I'm by no means perfect. Again, I'm not an archival project here. I really love the idea of a new approach being developed in my classrooms. I love the idea of learning through how students really feel inspired. The really tough conversations that we have in classrooms are the ones that fundamentally change the way that you see the world, right? We sit in a classroom together and people are coming from such incredibly different places in terms of culture and ethnicity and physical placement on this planet. And consequently, just fundamentally different understandings of what life is, what art is, and how they engage with a material practice. And that's so exciting to me. And I think I always take a little bit from every class that I teach. And I think also then my own work has become more open. I think of myself as more of an interdisciplinary maker as a result. I embrace iteration in a way that I think we all kind of aspire to embrace iteration. There are so many things that fundamentally change about my work every year that I teach, every class that I teach, everything that I do, I learn from my students. And I think that community is the best educator. Having the privilege of spending time with people and even for a short amount of time, feeling like you create space for community and for that exchange. If you don't leave that space fundamentally changed, I think there's something wrong. Something's not going right. I love teaching. I really love teaching so much. It's the best. It's the absolute best. Thank you for that question. That's a really
I imagine you're an incredible teacher, and it
you.
feels like that sort of, I don't know, the way you described it as such like an open space feels so rare in academia, and I'm sure the students really value it as well.
I really hope so, and that's something again that I hope to foster in my classrooms as a means of also teaching myself how to really embody those values. I want every student to feel incredibly welcome in my spaces. We create together, and again, collectively, I'm not imposing these things, but collectively we create a safe space and a space for sharing and for self-expression, and for learning in its kind of most hopefully fun and enjoyable way. I've been in classes, as I'm sure you have too, where it feels so rigid and it feels so prescribed, and you don't have that kind of looseness to be able to create yourself and the agency to be able to determine what your work, your practice, who you are, the many versions of who you are might look like. So I hope that my classrooms create space for that. I think you'd be a fantastic educator. You have such like rich questions and allow for such spectacular, I would say, investigation. And again, engaging with your work has changed, again, how I think about my own practice and how I'm going to go out into the world. And think even on digital platforms, I think that, again, your work is being made in such a fantastic and interesting and kind of engaging time where you're pushing us to think, where the intersections of our digital realms and our very human realms exist, and how they actually really overlap with one another. And that feels fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Someone hire you.
I'll leave Halifax. I'm happy. Yeah.
Becky, you said something in your response about community and how your classroom is one way of sort of engaging with community and how that's important to your work and to kind of art in general. And I kind of picked up on that because I think that also ties your work in with a lot of the other artists whose work is included in Canada Now, a lot of which does deal with community as collaborator or representation of community or the self within one's community. So I thought maybe as a way of just kind of tying things together, maybe we would return back to the theme of Canada Now. And I would love to hear you all keep speaking about your work forever, but just to be conscious of time, perhaps we'll just kind of conclude here. But could I ask each of you to speak a little bit about what does the phrase or this name Canada Now mean to you, and what does it mean to you to have your work represented in such a context? So perhaps Séamus, would you like to go first?
Sure. I am so flattered to be part of an amazing group of artists, and some that I've followed for so many years, and I have so much respect for, like Claude Ziak and Luther Kanadu, and you as well, Becky. And being in Atlantic, Canada, I can sometimes feel a bit like I'm peering from the outside into the rest of Canada. So to be put within a conversation with all these artists across the nation feels really wonderful. And also, like, I hope this isn't too gauche to say, but financially, it's so beneficial to have this acquisition happen when it's happened, because Canada right now is very difficult to live in. And as precarious as it is to be an artist, it's been even more so the past few years. And so it means a lot to have this support.
I would second all of those emotions. It feels like a real privilege to show alongside so many artists I have so much respect for, and to be kind of situated in this discussion that so many spectacular Canadian artists kind of fit into this category, and it feels very cool to extend that conversation. It feels like a real privilege. And at the same time, I have to also recognize that I think that it's incredibly complicated in its title and in its kind of inevitably in the sense, or the sentiment, I should say. And I hope that in representing Canada now, and I might even put Canada in air quotes now, I hope that this collective, this group of artists represent where Canada is moving. And if that is the case, then I really hope that we're representing, you know, a decolonial approach. I hope that we're representing this sense of, or sensibility even, just fundamentally a sensibility and a care towards sovereignty in these lands. And that's something that is fundamental to who I am as a settler here, and as somebody who is working every day to be a better settler. And I want to be deeply conscious of our responsibility within this show, outside of this show, in relation to the name Canada. I think that it all holds space here, and I hope that the conversation can continue to happen, because I can't separate the two. So great pride and great excitement and honor, and also a great sense of responsibility to be the best settlers we can, and the best artists, and artists who respect deeply sovereignty and the original kind of habitants and carers for these lands. So it means a lot in so many various ways.
Thank you, Becky. And thank you, Séamus. Thank you both for your incredible candor and openness in this conversation. And thank you for your work. We're so thrilled to have them in the Image Center collection, and to have them on view, and to share them with our audiences. And yes, the conversation will continue. And thank you both for being a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.